The whispers followed Blake Sterling through the polished marble lobby of Sterling Enterprises. Even after 5 years as CEO, he still noticed how conversations quieted when he passed, the way employees straightened their posture and averted their eyes. He built this reputation deliberately. The untouchable executive, brilliant but cold, whose ruthless business acumen had transformed a failing family company into a corporate powerhouse. Blake loosened his tie as the elevator ascended to the penthouse floor. His corner office overlooked Manhattan, the city sprawling beneath him like a kingdom. The morning sun glinted off neighboring skyscrapers, casting fractured light across his minimalist workspace. The space, like everything in his life, was precisely arranged. Nothing out of place, nothing unnecessary. "Mr. Sterling," his assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your 9 o'clock is here." "Send them in," Blake replied, not bothering to check his calendar. Whatever it was, he'd handle it efficiently like everything else. When the door opened, Blake expected a business associate or potential client. Instead, a woman entered, her posture straight, but her hands nervously twisting the strap of her purse. She wore a simple navy dress, her dark hair pulled back in a practical style. Something about her struck him as familiar, though he couldn't place it. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice soft but determined. "My name is Emma Bennett. We met 6 years ago at a charity gala in Chicago." Blake studied her face, searching his memory. 6 years ago had been chaos. His father's unexpected death, the company nearly bankrupt, his desperate push to save the Sterling legacy. "I apologize, Ms. Bennett. I don't recall." Emma nodded as if she'd expected this. It was brief. "You were dealing with your father's passing. We spent 1 weekend together before you returned to New York." Blake's expression remained neutral, but his mind raced through fragmented memories. Chicago. The hotel bar. A woman with kind eyes who had listened as he'd spoken about his father for the first and only time. A weekend of unexpected intimacy that had felt like coming up for air before diving back into the suffocating depths of his responsibilities. "I remember," he said finally. "What brings you here after all this time?" Emma took a deep breath. "There's someone you need to meet." She stepped aside and motioned toward the open door. A small girl peeked around the doorframe, her dark hair falling in waves around a heart-shaped face. She stepped hesitantly into the office, wide eyes taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows before fixing on Blake with unmistakable curiosity. Blake felt the air leave his lungs. The child, no more than 5 years old, had his mother's eyes. The distinctive sterling gray that he saw in his own reflection every morning. "This is Sophie," Emma said softly. "Your daughter." Emma hadn't planned to ever see Blake Sterling again. She built a life for herself and Sophie in Chicago. A modest apartment, a job as an elementary school art teacher, a small circle of supportive friends. But Sophie had started asking questions about her father, questions that grew more specific as she got older. And the resemblance between father and daughter had become impossible to ignore. Blake's face had drained of color when Sophie walked in. Now, sitting across from him at his massive desk, Emma watched his hands tremble slightly as he passed them over his face. "I have a 5-year-old daughter," he said, the words sounding strange in his mouth. 5.5. Sophie corrected, swinging her legs from the oversized chair Emma had helped her into. "I'll be 6 in December." Blake's eyes darted to the child, then back to Emma. "Why now? Why didn't you tell me when she was born?" Emma met his gaze steadily. "You made it clear our weekend together was temporary. When I found out I was pregnant, I tried calling the number you gave me. It was disconnected. My personal line changed when I became CEO," Blake said, his voice hollow. "But there were other ways to reach me. I saw your picture in a business magazine 6 months after Sophie was born," Emma replied. "The article described you as the Ice King of Wall Street who had saved Sterling Enterprises through ruthless restructuring. You looked different from the man I'd met. Harder. I decided Sophie and I were better off on our own." Sophie had pulled a sketchbook from her small backpack and was drawing intently, seemingly oblivious to the tension in the room. "What changed?" Blake asked. Emma watched her daughter for a moment before answering. "She needs to know where she comes from, and she started asking questions I can't answer." She hesitated. "There's also her health to consider." Blake straightened. "Is she sick?" "No, she's healthy. But there's a history of heart conditions in my family. The doctors want a complete family medical history from both sides." She met Blake's eyes. "I need to know about your family's medical background for Sophie's sake." Blake nodded, the businessman in him recognizing a practical problem that needed solving. "I can arrange that. Our family has extensive medical records." "And I thought, she deserves to know her father." Emma's voice softened. "Whatever comes of this meeting, that part is up to you." Sophie looked up from her drawing. "Is he going to be my dad now?" she asked, her gray eyes, so like Blake's, fixed on her mother. Emma felt her heart constrict. "That's something we all need to talk about, sweetie." Blake stood abruptly, moving to the window. His back to them, he asked, "How long are you in New York?" 2 weeks, Emma replied. "We're staying with my cousin in Brooklyn." He turned, his expression carefully controlled. "I'll need a DNA test." Emma nodded. She'd expected this. "I understand. It's just protocol," he added, his voice softer than before. Looking at her, "I don't really have doubts." Sophie held up her drawing, a colorful rendering of the Manhattan skyline visible from Blake's office. "Do you like it?" she asked him directly. Blake moved closer, studying the drawing with genuine surprise. "You're very talented." Sophie beamed. "Mom's an art teacher. She says I have a good eye for detail." Something shifted in Blake's expression as he looked from the child to Emma. "I'd like to meet with you both again, after the test results." "Of course," Emma said. As they prepared to leave, Blake knelt to Sophie's eye level, awkward but trying. "It was nice to meet you, Sophie." The little girl studied him seriously. "You look like me," she said simply. Blake Sterling, feared CEO and corporate legend, found himself completely disarmed by 5 simple words from a 5-year-old girl. 3 days later, the DNA test confirmed what Blake had known the moment he saw Sophie. She was unquestionably his daughter, the only sterling heir of her generation. Blake arranged to meet Emma and Sophie at Central Park, away from the corporate environment where he felt most in control. The spring day was perfect, sunlight filtering through newly leafed trees, children's laughter echoing from the nearby playground. Emma watched Blake approach, struck again by how different he looked outside his office. In casual clothes, designer jeans, and a simple button-down with the sleeves rolled up, he appeared younger, less intimidating. The resemblance between him and Sophie was even more pronounced in the natural light. "The results came back," he said, though they all knew what they would show. Sophie was more interested in the playground than adult conversation. "Can I go swing?" she asked Emma, bouncing on her toes. "Stay where I can see you," Emma cautioned as Sophie raced toward the empty swings. Blake and Emma settled on a bench with a clear view of the playground. For a moment, they watched Sophie in silence, her dark hair flying as she pumped her legs on the swing. "She's remarkable," Blake said finally. "She is," Emma agreed. "Smart, creative, compassionate. She makes friends everywhere she goes." "She doesn't get that from the Sterling side," Blake said with a hint of wry humor. "We tend toward introversion and criticism." Emma studied his profile. "You weren't like that in Chicago." Blake was quiet for so long that Emma thought he might not respond. "Chicago was an anomaly," he finally said. "My father had just died. The company was in shambles. I was supposed to be reviewing acquisition proposals in my hotel room, but I couldn't focus. I ended up in the bar instead." "Where you met an art teacher from the local elementary school," Emma finished, "who somehow got me talking about things I'd never discussed with anyone." Blake turned to her. "You were easy to talk to. That weekend was the only time I've ever stepped away from being a Sterling. And now, Now I need to figure out what it means to be Sophie's father. He watched his daughter jump from the swing and race to the slide. I'm not good with children, Emma. I've never even considered being a parent. Few people are naturally good at parenting, Emma said gently. Most of us learn as we go. I had terrible examples, Blake admitted. My father was absent except when he was criticizing me. My mother retreated into her charity work to escape an unhappy marriage. So you'll be different, Emma said simply. If you want to be part of her life. Blake looked at her sharply. Of course I want to be part of her life. She's a Sterling. Emma felt a flicker of disappointment. She's Sophie first. Being a Sterling is secondary. Before Blake could respond, Sophie ran up to them, cheeks flushed with excitement. Mom, they have a carousel. Can we ride it? Please. Emma smiled. Of course we can. Will you come too? Sophie asked Blake directly, her gray eyes serious. Something vulnerable flashed across Blake's face. I haven't been on a carousel since I was about your age. Then you're way overdue, Sophie declared, taking his hand as naturally as if she'd known him all her life. Emma watched them walk ahead, Sophie chattering and Blake listening with the intense focus he probably usually reserved for board meetings. Something shifted in her chest, a mixture of hope and apprehension. Whatever happened next would change all their lives. The carousel music tinkled in the background as Sophie, perched proudly on a painted horse, waved each time she circled past them. Blake and Emma stood at the perimeter, watching. I want to set up a trust for her, Blake said abruptly. College, healthcare, everything she might need. Emma shook her head. That's not why I came to you. I know that, Blake replied. But it's my responsibility, and I'd like you both to move to New York. Emma turned to him in surprise. Blake, we have a life in Chicago. My job, Sophie's school, our apartment. I can find you a teaching position at any school in Manhattan. Sophie could attend Brookfield Academy. It's the best private school in the city. And I'll buy you an apartment in a good neighborhood. He spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to solving problems with money and influence. That's not how this works, Emma said firmly. You can't just rearrange our lives to fit your schedule. Blake frowned. I'm trying to do the right thing. The right thing is getting to know your daughter before making life-changing decisions, Emma replied. Sophie and I are real people, not assets to be relocated. Blake's expression closed. I'm trying to make up for 5 years of absence. You can't buy that time back, Emma said gently. But you can be present now, in whatever way works for all of us. The carousel slowed, and Sophie jumped off her horse, running to them with wind-blown hair and bright eyes. That was amazing. Can we get ice cream now? Blake looked at Emma, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded. I know a place nearby that makes the best ice cream in Manhattan, he told Sophie, whose eyes widened with delight. As they walked toward the ice cream shop, Sophie naturally took both their hands, creating a physical link between them. Emma felt Blake tense beside her, then gradually relax as Sophie swung their arms and chatted about her favorite flavors. In that moment, they looked like any family enjoying a spring day in the park. But Emma knew appearances were deceiving. She and Blake were still strangers in many ways, their only connection the little girl between them. A connection that had appeared in Blake's ordered life like a beautiful disruption. News traveled fast in corporate circles. By Monday morning, Blake's executive assistant had fielded 3 calls from gossip columnists asking about the CEO's weekend outing with a mystery woman and child. Blake's PR team was already crafting a statement, anticipating questions about the sterling hair that no one had known existed. Blake stared out his office window. The city spread before him, but his mind was on the weekend. Sophie's delighted laugh as she tasted the best ice cream in Manhattan. The serious way she'd explained her drawing techniques to him. The feel of her small hand trustingly placed in his. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Sterling, the board members are assembled in the conference room. Thank you, Claire. I'll be right there. Blake straightened his tie and gathered his thoughts. The quarterly board meeting would proceed as usual, but afterward, he would inform the key stakeholders about Sophie. He needed to control the narrative before the gossip columns created their own. The meeting proceeded efficiently. Profits were up, international expansion was on track, and the new product line was exceeding expectations. Blake delivered his report with his usual precision, but he felt oddly detached from the numbers and projections that had once consumed his attention. When the formal agenda concluded, Blake remained standing. "Before we adjourn, I have a personal announcement." The board members, mostly older men who had known his father, regarded him with varying degrees of interest. "Last week, I learned that I have a 5-year-old daughter," Blake stated simply. "Her name is Sophie Bennett. Her mother and I were briefly involved 6 years ago, but I was unaware of Sophie's existence until now. DNA testing has confirmed paternity." A murmur rippled through the room. Gerald Harrington, the eldest board member and his father's closest friend, spoke first. "Well, this is unexpected. How will this affect your role here?" "It won't," Blake replied firmly. "But Sophie is a sterling, and eventually this information will become public. I wanted you to hear it directly from me." "Where is the child now?" asked Victoria Chen, one of the few female board members. "She and her mother live in Chicago, but they're currently visiting New York. We're discussing arrangements for the future." "Will you be pursuing custody?" Harrington asked bluntly. Blake felt a flash of irritation. "That's a private matter. What's important is that Sophie will be acknowledged as my daughter and a member of the Sterling family." The meeting adjourned shortly after, but Blake was unsurprised when Harrington lingered. The older man had been his father's closest advisor and had grudgingly become Blake's mentor during the company's turnaround. "This complicates things," Harrington said once they were alone. "How so?" Blake kept his tone neutral. "A child changes everything, Blake. Especially for someone in your position." Harrington studied him. "What's the mother like? Is she looking for a payday?" "Emma is an elementary school art teacher who's raised our daughter alone for 5 years," Blake replied coldly. "She didn't come to me for money." "Everyone has a price," Harrington said with the cynicism of someone who had spent decades in corporate boardrooms. "You should have your legal team draw up a generous settlement and custody arrangement that limits your exposure." "Emma isn't a business problem to solve," Blake snapped, surprising himself with his vehemence. "And Sophie isn't a liability to be managed." Harrington raised his eyebrows. That doesn't sound like the Blake Sterling who saved this company through cold, rational decision-making. Maybe that Blake Sterling is learning there are things more important than balance sheets and market share, Blake replied, gathering his papers. "If you'll excuse me, I have another appointment." As he strode back to his office, Blake's phone vibrated with a text from Emma. "Sophie wants to know if you'd like to see her school art project before we leave next week." Blake found himself smiling at the screen. "I'd like that very much." When Emma's cousin's Brooklyn brownstone was a world away from Blake's Manhattan penthouse. The living room where they sat was cozy and lived in, filled with books, mismatched furniture, and the artwork of Emma's cousin, a professional photographer. Sophie had insisted on displaying her art project properly, so Blake found himself sitting on a slightly lumpy couch beside Emma, waiting for the exhibition to begin. "She's been working on this for weeks," Emma said softly. "Her class studied famous landmarks, and each student chose one to recreate. Ladies and gentlemen," Sophie announced grandly from the hallway, "welcome to my exhibition." She entered the room carrying a 3-dimensional model of the Empire State Building, carefully constructed from cardboard, paper, and what appeared to be repurposed household items. The structure was impressively detailed for a 5-year-old's work, with tiny windows, a recognizable lobby, and even a small King Kong climbing the side. "This is my Empire State Building," Sophie explained seriously. "It took me 3 weeks and 2 days to build it. The windows are made from aluminum foil, and King Kong is made from clay that Mom helped me bake in the oven." "It's extraordinary," Blake said, genuinely impressed. You've captured the Art Deco details perfectly. Sophie beamed at the specific praise. Do you want to see inside? The elevator works. For the next 20 minutes, Blake found himself fully engaged in Sophie's detailed explanation of her project. She had created miniature floors inside the building, complete with tiny furniture and paper people. When she demonstrated the elevator, a small box that moved up and down on a string pulley system, Blake felt an unfamiliar sensation in his chest. Pure, uncomplicated pride. My teacher said it was the best in the class, Sophie confided. She asked if an adult helped me, but I did it all myself. Well, except for the hot glue gun parts. Mom had to do those. Sophie has always been detail-oriented, Emma said. Even as a toddler, she would arrange her toys in perfect patterns. That's definitely a sterling trait, Blake admitted. My father used to say our family motto should be precision in all things. Is that your dad? Sophie asked, pointing to a framed photo on Blake's phone screen that was visible on the coffee table. It was a formal portrait of his father in his office, stern and imposing in an expensive suit. Blake picked up the phone, looking at the image with new eyes. Yes, that was your grandfather. His name was Edward Sterling. He looked serious, Sophie observed. He was very serious, Blake agreed, especially about work. Did he play with you when you were little? Sophie asked, the innocent question striking at the heart of Blake's complicated relationship with his father. Not often, Blake admitted after a pause. He was very busy running the company. Sophie considered this. Are you too busy to play? Emma started to intervene, but Blake caught her eye, silently asking to answer. I have been very busy, he said honestly, but I'm learning that some things are more important than work. Sophie nodded, satisfied with his answer. Do you want to see my room? It's not really my room. It's Cousin Jess's guest room, but I put up my drawings. I'd like that, Blake said, rising to follow Sophie down the hallway. Left alone, Emma gazed at the space where Blake had been sitting. Something was changing in him. Subtle shifts in his expression. Moments of unguarded emotion when he looked at Sophie. It reminded her of the man she'd met in Chicago, before life and responsibility had hardened him. Emma had been so certain she was doing the right thing, coming to New York, introducing Sophie to her father. Now she wasn't sure what outcome she wanted. Sophie was clearly smitten with Blake, and he seemed genuinely taken with her. But their lives were so different. And despite their intense connection years ago, Emma barely knew the man Blake had become. Blake's Manhattan penthouse had always felt appropriately proportioned for a CEO's residence, spacious enough for the occasional business dinner, minimally decorated in keeping with his preference for order. But as he wandered through it that evening after meeting Sophie's art exhibition, the space felt cavernous and empty. Sterile. He poured himself a scotch and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights sparkling below. His phone contained 27 unread emails and 5 missed calls, but for once, Blake felt no urgency to address them. Instead, he opened his photo gallery to the pictures he'd taken today. Sophie proudly holding her Empire State Building model, her serious expression as she explained the construction techniques, her delighted laugh when he'd asked if he could take the photos to show his colleagues what a real architectural model should look like. Blake had never considered himself sentimental. Sentiment was inefficient, his father had taught him. But looking at these images of a little girl with his gray eyes and his mother's smile, Blake felt something fundamental shift inside him. As if spaces long closed off were creaking open, dusty and disused, but still intact. He found himself dialing a number before he'd fully formed the intention. Blake. Emma's voice sounded surprised. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, he said quickly. I hope I'm not calling too late. No, it's fine. Sophie's just gotten into bed. Did you forget something? Blake hesitated. No, I wanted to thank you for today, and for bringing Sophie to New York. There was a pause. You don't need to thank me for that. I do, Blake insisted. You had no obligation to tell me about her. Many women wouldn't have, given the circumstances. Emma's voice softened. Sophie deserves to know her father. And despite what you might think, I never viewed you as just a weekend fling. Blake, what happened between us in Chicago was meaningful to me. Blake closed his eyes, remembering Emma in the hotel bar, her genuine interest as he talked about his father's death and the weight of legacy. The way she listened without judgment or agenda. Their conversations about art and literature and life that had stretched into the night. The unexpected chemistry that had led them back to his hotel room. And the weekend that followed, a brief respite from reality. It was meaningful to me too, he admitted, more than I allowed myself to acknowledge at the time. And now, Emma asked softly, now I'm trying to understand what it means to be a father to a 5-year-old girl I just met, Blake said honestly, and what it means to have you back in my life, even temporarily. Is that what you want? For me to be back in your life? Blake took a breath. I've built my career on knowing exactly what I want and how to get it. But with you and Sophie, I don't have a strategic plan. I just know I don't want you to leave New York and disappear again. We're not disappearing, Emma assured him. But we do have lives in Chicago. I know. Blake paused. Would you consider having dinner with me tomorrow night? Just the two of us. There are things we should discuss about Sophie's future. Okay. Emma agreed after a moment. My cousin can watch Sophie. I'll send a car for you at 7. After they hung up, Blake stood motionless, looking out at the city. For the first time in years, the future, always so meticulously planned, felt uncertain. And strangely, Blake found he didn't mind. The restaurant Blake chose was intimate and elegant without being ostentatious, a small Italian place in Greenwich Village, where the owner greeted him by name and led them to a secluded corner table with a view of the small garden courtyard. Emma wore a simple black dress that Blake remembered from Chicago, one of the few personal details that had stayed with him over the years. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, and she wore minimal makeup that highlighted her natural beauty. Blake found himself studying her face, relearning the features that had haunted the edges of his memory for years. This is lovely, Emma said as they settled at the table. You come here often. When I need to escape the corporate dinner circuit, Blake replied. Their pasta is made fresh daily, and the wine list is exceptional. They ordered, and Blake selected a bottle of Barolo from a small family vineyard he'd visited in Italy. As they waited for their food, a comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that had characterized their weekend in Chicago, where words hadn't always been necessary. So, Emma said finally, you wanted to discuss Sophie's future. Blake set down his wine glass. Yes, I've been thinking about how to be part of her life in a meaningful way when you return to Chicago. And I'd like to visit regularly. Perhaps Sophie could spend some school breaks here in New York, and I've already contacted my company's legal team about the trust fund I mentioned. Emma nodded slowly. Those things make sense. But Blake, being a father isn't just about financial support and occasional visits. I'm aware of that, Blake said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his tone. But I'm trying to be realistic about the situation we're in. Which is, you and Sophie live in Chicago. My life and company are here. Unless... He stopped abruptly. Unless what? Emma prompted. Blake met her gaze directly. Unless you would consider relocating to New York. Emma sighed. We've already discussed this. Not fully, Blake countered. I understand your reluctance to uproot your lives based on a few meetings, but think about what New York could offer Sophie. The museums, the cultural opportunities, the educational advantages. She has a good life in Chicago, Emma said quietly. Friends, a school she loves, stability. She could have those things here too, Blake insisted, plus a relationship with her father. And where would we live? In an apartment you buy for us. How would that work, Blake? Blake hesitated. I've been thinking about that. My penthouse has 3 bedrooms. You and Sophie could live with you." Emma looked genuinely surprised. "Blake, we barely know each other anymore." "We're connected for life through Sophie," Blake pointed out. "And I think there's still something between us, Emma. Something worth exploring." Their appetizers arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. When they were alone again, Emma spoke carefully. "What happened in Chicago was special," she acknowledged. "But it was also brief and under unusual circumstances. We both were different people then." "Were we?" Blake asked. "Or did we just show each other parts of ourselves that we usually keep hidden?" Emma studied him thoughtfully. "Maybe. But building a life together, which is what you're suggesting, requires more than a connection from 6 years ago and a shared child." "I know that," Blake said quietly. "But I also know that in the past week, my perfectly ordered life has been turned upside down in the best possible way. Meeting Sophie has changed everything. And seeing you again." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I never forgot you, Emma." Emma looked down at their joined hands. "I never forgot you either." "How could I?" "Sophie has your eyes, your focus, even some of your mannerisms. She has your kindness," Blake said softly. "Your creativity. Your ability to see beauty in unexpected places." Emma's eyes met his, and Blake felt a familiar current between them. The same chemistry that had drawn them together years ago. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," Blake said. "Just think about it. About the possibilities." Emma nodded slowly. "I will. But Blake, whatever happens between us, it has to be what's best for Sophie." "Of course," Blake agreed immediately. "She's what matters most." As their main courses arrived, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Memories from Chicago, updates on their lives over the past 6 years, funny stories about Sophie's early years that Blake had missed. By the time they finished dessert, a tiramisu they shared as they had during that weekend long ago, the initial tension had dissolved into something warmer, more intimate. Outside the restaurant, waiting for the car Blake had arranged, Emma turned to him. "Thank you for tonight. It was nice to talk without interruption." "Like old times," Blake murmured. "Not quite," Emma smiled. "In Chicago, you weren't a high-powered CEO, and I didn't have a 5-year-old waiting for me." "True, but some things haven't changed." In a moment of impulse, Blake leaned down and brushed his lips against hers. A gentle kiss that carried echoes of the past and possibilities for the future. Emma stilled for a moment, then leaned into the kiss briefly before pulling back, her expression a mixture of emotions Blake couldn't fully decipher. "Good night, Blake," she said softly as the car arrived. "Good night, Emma," he replied, watching as she slipped into the back seat and disappeared into the New York night. The next week passed in a blur of meetings between Sophie, Emma, and Blake. They visited Central Park Zoo, the Museum of Natural History, and had a picnic in Bryant Park. Each outing revealed new facets of their evolving dynamic. Sophie's growing comfort with Blake, Emma's cautious optimism, Blake's discovery of a patience he hadn't known he possessed. But time was running out. Emma and Sophie were scheduled to return to Chicago in 2 days. Blake had canceled meetings and rearranged his schedule to spend as much time with them as possible, behavior that had his executive team exchanging worried glances and Harrington openly questioning his focus. Blake didn't care. For the first time in his life, something mattered more than Sterling Enterprises. Thursday afternoon found the 3 of them at Blake's penthouse. Emma had finally agreed to visit after Blake had extended the invitation several times. Sophie was enthralled by the floor-to-ceiling windows and the panoramic view of the city. "You can see my whole Empire State Building from here," she exclaimed, pressing her face against the glass. Blake had arranged for a catered lunch, and afterward, Sophie had fallen asleep on the living room sofa, exhausted from their morning at the museum. Blake and Emma sat on the balcony. The city spread before them. "She's remarkable," Blake said, gazing through the glass doors at his sleeping daughter. I keep discovering new things about her that amaze me. Emma smiled. She feels the same about you. This morning, she told me your eyes crinkle just like hers when you laugh. Blake felt something warm unfurl in his chest. Have you thought about what we discussed at dinner? Emma nodded. I have. A lot. And? It's complicated, Blake. Moving across the country, changing schools, leaving friends behind. That's a lot to ask of a 5-year-old. Children are adaptable, Blake said, especially when changes are presented as adventures rather than disruptions. It's not just about Sophie, Emma admitted. It's about us. Whatever's happening between us. Blake took her hand. What is happening between us, Emma? She looked at their joined hands. I don't know. There's still something there. Chemistry, connection, history. But relationships need more than that to work. Like what? Like trust, understanding, compromise. Emma met his gaze. You've lived one way for a long time, Blake. Your career comes first. Your company defines you. What happens when a 5-year-old and her mother disrupt that perfectly ordered existence? They already have, Blake replied simply. And I've discovered I prefer the disruption to the order. Emma smiled skeptically. You say that now. But what about when Sophie's having a meltdown because she doesn't want to wear her school uniform? Or when I need to cancel dinner plans because she's running a fever? Real life with a child isn't like these perfect New York adventures we've been having. I'm not naive, Emma, Blake said. I know there will be challenges, but I also know that discovering Sophie and reconnecting with you has shown me what's been missing from my life. And what's that? Connection. Purpose beyond profit margins and stock prices. Blake's voice softened. Family. Emma's expression was conflicted. I want to believe that's possible. But, Mom. Sophie's sleepy voice came from the doorway. I had a dream about butterflies. Emma turned, opening her arms as Sophie climbed onto her lap. You did. Tell me about it. As Sophie described her dream, a fantastical tale involving butterflies that changed colors and talked to her. Blake watched them together, their easy affection, the way they fit so naturally as mother and daughter. He wanted to be part of that, to belong to them and have them belong to him. Mr. Blake, do you have any coloring books? Sophie asked when she'd finished her butterfly story. I don't think so, he admitted, but I have paper and pens. Would that work? Sophie nodded enthusiastically. Blake went to his home office and returned with a sketch pad and a set of expensive drawing pens, tools he used for occasional architectural sketches, a hobby he rarely found time for anymore. These are grown-up pens, he explained, showing Sophie how to use them. They're called technical pens. Architects and artists use them. Like Mom, Sophie said, accepting the pen carefully. Like Mom, Blake agreed, smiling at Emma over Sophie's head. For the next hour, they sat at Blake's dining table, drawing together. Sophie created an elaborate butterfly garden. Blake sketched the view from his window, and Emma drew a portrait of Sophie concentrating on her artwork. The simple domesticity of the scene struck Blake with unexpected force. This was what his expensive penthouse had always lacked. Life, family, love. We should head back to Brooklyn soon, Emma said eventually, checking her watch. We promised your cousin we'd have dinner with her tonight. Can Mr. Blake come too? Sophie asked. Emma hesitated. I'm not sure if. I'd be happy to join you if I'm welcome, Blake interjected. Emma met his gaze. Of course you're welcome. But it's nothing fancy, just a home-cooked meal. Those are the best kind, Blake said, surprising himself with how much he meant it.